Samhraidh Willie Clancy's tribute to a remarkable person in Irish traditional music, Tony McMahon. And just to remind you now, please turn off the mobile phones or turn them down in silent and look at the exits to the left and to the right. This afternoon's event will be curated by Liam O'Connor, himself a fine young musician and a tutor here at the Willie Clancy Summer School for many years. And Liam's interest apart from music is in research into Irish traditional music, folklore and history. He is currently working on the life and times of Patrick Weston Joyce, and he has researched to a great degree the life story of that man, and also lectured on him here and in the United States. And very recently, Liam has been appointed as Director of the Irish Traditional Music Archive. He takes up his new position in August, and Liam, we wish you the very best of luck. Liam O'Connor.
Good evening, Margaret, Harry. I'm delighted to be in a position today to give this, or to arrange this tribute to Tony McMahon, and there was an idea that was instigated by Scoil Samhraidh Willie Clancy here. It's a celebration and a tribute to Tony McMahon and his music in particular. We're going to have the focus be complete. It's going to start and end with Tony's own music. Just to give you a brief outline, I've spoke to a lot of musicians and a lot of friends of Tony and asked for tributes to be sent in, and I wanted to cover three topics really. The music that Tony was influenced by himself, so like Mrs. Galvin and Joe Cooley and Tommy Potts and Seamus Ennis. Secondly then, I wanted to get perspectives from his peers and musicians that he's played with and that he's worked with in RTE over the years. And then the third part, I wanted to look at Tony's musical legacy. So a lot of that features a younger generation of musicians as well that are inspired by Tony's music. So, like I said, we're going to start and end with Tony's music. So, Mr. Ray.
Mr. Ray.
That's a piece of music which has stayed with me in my DNA since I first heard it in 1955 or 6 in Ennis. The musician is Mrs. Ellen Galvin from Mayasta in West Clare. And she had a call in her music, a call which drove the listener back to another previous time, the time before Willie Clancy and herself. There was an unmerciful call, a beautiful call in her music, and it has lived with me for many years. And when I was working in RT, I kept making inquiries about a son of hers which I heard was living someplace in the UK, and I finally contacted him, and he sent me a copy of that tape of her music, which I sent to the Traditional Music Archive, and I'm glad to see that it still survives, but it has an unmerciful, ancient quality and a call in it, which no one of the young musicians have. And I'm delighted to be able to play it here today in Milltown.
Tony might have been influenced by, and there's certainly no doubt that I think Tommy Potts and Mrs. Calvin in our way was a big influence on Tony, and of course Willie Clancy, in his earlier years. I have fond memories of, I think it was around 58 or 59, watching Tony. He was about 19, 20, on a concert in Kilrush, and Mrs. Galvin was on the same concert. And God, it's just an amazing memory to have of him playing, And I just remember that he was always like, not a hero, but a superhero to me.
Yeah.
And what I liked about his music was his understanding of our music, the music like from another time, if you like, like that of Garrett Barry and Mrs. Galvin, of course, and I'm sure he met with Mrs. Galvin many times. She wouldn't have known Garrett Barry. She wouldn't have, because I think he died in a time in around 1912 or something,
Right.
So Mrs. Galvin would have known. So Tony has that understanding of the music of that period. And of course, his love of traditional singing and the Shannon songs and his expression of the music, his interpretation was just beautiful of these airs with very much respect for the Shannon singers,
Yeah.
And then in the dance music, he had the swing and the lilt, which was all of his own. There was nobody that sounded or could ever sound and never will sound like, in my estimation, like Tony McMahon, if I were to use a word, I don't know, his music was just, I'd say, superiority and commanding. That's what I would say about his music, and imagine you would, Tony might have been influenced by.
When we were recording our album or researching it in the preliminary stages, he was one of the first men that we wanted to go and talk to because we knew that he had interaction with some of the women that we were researching as part of the housekeepers. And when we landed to his house in the Liberties, it was very funny. We gave him the list off of the women that we were researching, and as soon as we mentioned Mrs. Galvin, his eyes lit up. He had no interest in talking about anybody else, and he told us that he saw her playing just once in the old ground in Ennis when he was about 15, and he said he could still remember he was so impressed by her playing, and that it really imprinted on him as an experience, and it was obvious that he had so much respect and understanding about her music, that obviously we could never have, because we had never met her or been influenced by her so much. And I thought that also, after so many years, that it was still so prominent in his memory as well. It was kind of like we were getting a little window into the past there. But fair play to you, Tony.
These are some photographs from Tony's earlier days. He's taken in Ennis, I believe, in 1954 at an early cultus meeting as well. Mrs. Crotty there in the centre, and a lot of other Clare musicians. Pat O'Loughlin there in the front row too. And of course, next photo there is Tony behind a great inspiration to him, a great influence on him. Joe Cooley there is in the front row, and another photo of Sean Reid and with members of the Mahon family as well. Tony moved to Dublin around 1957. It's a photo of him playing with Nick Hand in Dublin. When he arrived in Dublin, he was already familiar with another giant of influence on Tony, Tommy Potts. And he's put in an image there from Google Maps there, which shows where Tony's house is at the moment now in Reginald Square, and it's according to Google Maps at least, it's a 3-minute walk to where Tommy Potts grew up. And that's a photo taken at a house party in Tony McMahon's house with Pat O'Loughlin, of course, and John Kelly is in the photograph behind. Of course, Tommy Potts on the left, and Seamus McMahon there as well.
Tommy Potts, unequalled as a fiddler, and a man who has stayed in my mind since I first heard him in Ennis in my own kitchen in 1953. And Billy Byrne of Ballymanus was one of his wonderful compositions, and he had an angle on the tune which was beyond all description in its beauty and in its tenderness. And the thing about Potts, Tommy Potts, was he had wonderful taste in music. He was able to extract the soul and the spirit of a tune right out, and he was able to present it to us, the young listeners, in a way which made us fall in love with his music. He'd never again be replicated. I remember him with great love and great fondness. He was superb, unequalled. That was Tommy Potts.
Do you know, would you speak a little bit about your interview with Tommy Potts as well, when you interviewed him, and the nature of that conversation as well? It was struck me as a very deep and searching conversation?
When I was working for RTE as a radio producer, I occasionally would send people to Tommy's house to beg him to come and record for me. And he kept refusing, but he agreed one particular time anyway, and I recorded some music. And I recorded an interview with him in his own house. And Tommy had a very distinctive voice. He had an old-fashioned Dublin educated accent with a good solid rhyme and rhythm in it. And we talked about intimate things to do with his music. And I was honoured that I was able to use some of that material later for broadcast and for a CD of Tommy's. He was a most wonderful player. Unequalled, as I said.
Fantastic, yeah. Tony, were there aspects of Tommy's playing or performance or the way he approached music that influenced you either directly or indirectly?
The thing about Tommy's playing was he seemed to me always to be an anarchist. There was nothing conventional about him. He approached a tune as if it was a piece of art, and he gave the tune its merit and length, and with whatever conurbations or innovations he had with it. And he always innovated a tune in a most tasteful, heart-wrenching way. It was beyond description. In fact, he did influence me to the extent that it was possible, and I miss him greatly.
What does it mean to you? Now, I know you've always championed his music and living so close to where he grew up, and you've a very impressive picture from Action at Trino up. It pride of place in your house here in the Liberties. What does that mean something to you?
That photograph of Tommy Potts means the world to me. It means he's in charge of my house as long as I live here. And I'm living only around the corner from where he used to live in the 50s, number 6, the Coombe. It's only a short distance, couple of minutes walk from his house to my house now. But I look at that photograph every day and I imagine him in his youth, and I can feel the love in his music. He was incomparable. There was no person I ever heard that could equal the passion that Tommy brought to his music. It was a deep reservoir of love of Ireland, and it was moving. He moved us listeners to tears. He was only wonderful.
It's a photo of Tommy Potts, the O'Loughlin family kind of lent to myself and father at one stage. Yes, I have a short clip of Tommy playing the Boys of Ballysadare and kind of a minor turn at the end of the first part, and then a recording of Tony playing, I think in Church Street, my father had from back in the late 50s or early 60s. So just to hear Tommy's rendition of Boys of Ballysadare, and then a short clip of Tony playing as well. included this letter as well. This is in 2000. I was at a party in Tony McMahon's house, and he had a recording of Tommy Potts that was made for Padder Loughlin at one stage, and I expressed an interest in the recording. I listened to it at the party. It was on the background. I gravitated towards it. But the next morning, Tony had posted a copy of the cassette out to my family home in Baldoyle, and it just included there as a symbol of Tony's generosity and his with music he loved, and there was. I'm sure he had plenty of other things to be doing, but cleaning up the house and the rest of after a house party. But to put it in the post, I always remember that when I think of Tony. Of course, Paddy Blacken, a great friend and colleague of Tony McMahon over the years, and he says a few words here.
Tony's legacy is on so many different levels. Number one, it's his own music. Number one, I think that he has created a sound, and I think he has influenced a generation of musicians, particularly playing on the accordion, that will carry on for generations and generations. On that level, I think he profoundly influenced, or has influenced the discourse around traditional music in the last 20 years. I think in terms of television, he single-handedly has been responsible for all that is good that came out of RTE, and that is something that I believe he has never received the credit for. So in that sense, he's left a legacy of recordings, he's left a legacy of all the great musicians over the years. That's all the way down to Tony.
The music in Cormac Begley has that. That was the great voice of Paddy Highfield. Cooley in Munster, Shannos. The call that music has, it beckons from the remote past. It beckons us to a time before we ourselves were born. And it is full of musicality and musical innovation, where the air of the tune leads to so many wonderful embellishments, so beautifully sung by Paddy Highfield there, reminding us of all we have lost.
I've asked Cormac Begley to play O'Neill's March, and I think Cormac will testify himself how influenced he has been by Tony McMahon, and the command of Cormac.
An ómórdom a bheitha de verdanta agus den clúr léchar gael agus léchar ceol Tony McMahon. He turned for more get Tony Rumsa agus Mahon. He's had a huge influence on my generation and the generation before me. I grew up with my father always encouraging me to listen to Tony's music and also to listen to Tony's attitude and thoughts about music and how to listen to him when he spoke about music. And in terms of musicality, he's one of the most fearless musicians, courageous musicians and honest. And he goes to places where other musicians are often afraid to go. So I'm going to play these two tunes for Tony on this wonderful celebration.
I've always found Tony McMahon's music very moving and full of heart and soul. Listening recently to the recordings that he made in Knocknagree with all the dancers on Noel Hill, that's really good music. Then I heard an air recently called Baldy na Scadon, which he plays, and again there's a whole lot of different sensitivities in that. And I know Tony himself has misgivings about the accordion, but honestly, in his hands, he just doesn't need to have them. He plays it superbly, and he's created or he's fostered a whole different style that other people have followed, and you can't but appreciate his music. And then when you're talking about Tony, you're talking about a lot more than his music, because all his work in television, the programmes he made, and the radio programmes like The Long Note, and the fact that he always brought amazing taste to it. You could never say that his taste wasn't bang on, and then things like his involvement with the Bothy Band, I think Tony is the man who introduced an interest in Breton music to Ireland. So many things. If you were to take Tony out of the scene, I think, and the history of traditional music, there'd be a huge gap. So I just hope that this is a good tribute. It's well deserved, a place in the sun. I hope that the sun is shining in Milltown Railway today for it.
Of course, Noel Hill has also played with Tony for a really significant number of years and worked with the Minority as well. And Noel plays, it's been mentioned already that the recording in 1985 with Enough McGree, a lot of people, when I was speaking about Tony's music, that comes up, and in particular the first track as well, Come On Boys, and so here's Noel speaking about that recording, how it came about as well.
We played a lot of music together, and we never planned any of that. You know, it kind of came around that way that we played, and people were asking us to do concerts and involved in the television programs, and out of that came the Knock na Brí recording, and it was. We did 2 recordings together. The first one, the Knock na Brí one, was in the mid-1980s, I think, and it's the idea behind it, and it's quite a popular record. But the idea was to create the country house dance and all the acoustics of that, and all the packed crowd into a country kitchen where it would be all kind of claustrophobic and pushed together, and we put in a lot of mics into that recording. There was mics, open mics, in a lot of different locations, all going into multi-track 2-inch tape, and consequently afterwards I was the producer of that and the second record as well, but I was left with a lot of material that I had to go through and try and decide what was to be used. It was all recorded in one night, except for the following evening, on a Friday night. I'll never forget it, because I had just buried my uncle a few days before that in County Clare, and I took the ferry across to Kerry and down to Knock na Brí on the Cork-Kerry border. And I felt a terrible loss after my uncle Pádraig a clinic. But when we got down there, when all the mics were set up, it was packed. I think some people thought we were making a TV program, and people had come from far and wide. But once I saw it, I said, this is it. If we can capture this now on the tape, we'll have a good recording to go home with. And Tony was playing great that time. I mean, that was a real golden age of McMahon's playing, that period when I was playing with him, in my view. And then literally we tried to start the recording, and just put context on it for people. We tried to start the recording, and Dan Connell, the owner of the pub, God be good to him, we'd start, but there was such a crush and a power of people around, and there was such energy in the place that we had a couple of false starts, because the rope went up and the horses weren't lined up, you know. But eventually, anyway, we had the people back far enough, or Dan Connell had the people back far enough, and because we had the set dancers there, and they had to have room. And all of a sudden, Dan Connell said, "No, boys!" And McMahon went bang, boom, 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 and I was ready, because again, it was like just having a conversation. This music was basically a continuation of many conversations we had, so I was ready as well, and away she went. And that was totally unrehearsed. It was that's how it happened, and the whole recording was done like that, and the recording was done on that Friday night. The solos, we tried the solos, and it got too noisy towards the end. But it was a quick recording to make, and the Saturday evening then we did the rest.
the electricity within Tony's music that really grabbed me and a lot of players in my generation. I suppose if you think of those first few notes of The Humours of Castlefin on Tony and Noel's album, now boys, up, and just that drive and energy, and if you could capture that, and Tony did capture that, and I think a lot of my generation have taken that energy, and that's some of the energy they carry through in their own music. He had the tradition on mainstream media in primetime slots when there wasn't many radio stations, when there was one or two TV stations. Traditional music was front and centre. Tony had a lot to do with that, and he also had the discernment to pick good musicians, and I suppose he also sparked debate within the tradition, and I feel that that debate within the tradition, that the swinging pendulum where people like one thing and don't like another thing, but that swinging pendulum it's not swinging as strong as it was, and that's since Tony has left, the debate is sorely needed within traditional music, and not only within traditional music, but traditional music needs to be on prime time slots on our main TV station. So good man Tony, you definitely put the tradition out there. I suppose for me, Tony's legacy will live on with his music, his recorded music, but also through his TV work. Those recordings of the older musicians they give players of my generation and younger a look at the masters in full tilt on the telly. And not alone the musicians that were playing themselves, but also if you looked in the background, there were always musicians watching the musicians. And it's the reactions of those musicians that make it 3D for me. There's also the emotion attached with a musician, listening to a musician, and Tony captured that and captured it for generations to come. So thank you for that, Tony. I think amongst the music community, we have to acknowledge that you've done the music great. Tá seirbhís tugadh don ceol agus gur míle maith do sucht agus go maithe tú an chéad.
Hello Tony, congratulations on receiving this wonderful tribute. Now, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to say, and I thought I could just speak off the cuff, but I realised very quickly if I didn't write down my thoughts, I'd forget everything, including who I was going to dedicate the tribute to. So I was clever and I wrote down my thoughts. So here we go. Tony McMahon. There are different emotional levels to musical expression, whether it's from the singing tradition or the instrumental tradition. Some musicians may opt to stay on the surface, musically speaking, while others are willing to explore the deeper musical waters. Tony McMahon only operates from the deepest emotional levels, conveying a genuinely personal and heartfelt message with his music. His playing brings the listener back to an earlier time, which makes Tony's musical expression truly unique. Now, Tony, a quick trip down memory lane. The mid-50s, when you met my family for the first time, your visits down to Capel Street and meeting the whole Kelly family. 1970, the Musician of the Year competition, and you may remember that famous party out in Boland's in Glasnevin. The two Cossaceol programmes in 1972 with Trina and Mahon and all the other wonderful musicians, and you gave me 10 tunes to practice and learn in a week, and I did my best for that one. Now, also the night that yourself, myself and John played outside Club Conan na Gaeilge at 2 o'clock in the morning, and a person who lived up overhead there, you may remember, he put his head out the window and he asked us to leave the area, but of course not exactly in those words. And then he threw a basin of water out on top of us. So we made our way down to Stephen's Green and we took the instruments out and we played Larry O'Gaff for the best part of an hour, and I'd say we must have played it that night about 40 times over. So I'll never forget that particular night. So enjoyable. The time you played the Name of the Butlers minibus coming up Capel Street, and the minibus pulled up outside the shop and you were playing away outside. The tour work we did together, work with Michael Russell, Dolores Keane and Dahi Sproul. Uppercuts in San Francisco with Michael Russell in the mid-80s. You may remember that great day in San Francisco that we played. Drinking B&Bs in St. Louis. Paddy O'Shea's, the time that we played in Paddy O'Shea's and we met Sean Costa Cahan's family members. The Rolling Wave on Buckley and Bon, Pert Nabuki, playing tunes in Paddy Hennessy's. The list is endless. So I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but I'm with you in spirit, and I send you my very best wishes, and I look forward to seeing you in the not too distant future.
Seamus Dennett's been such a huge influence on Tony. I think that photo on the right is Tony in New York. Was it Tony? In Bleecker Street, I think, where Seamus was at the time as well. So,
Many years ago, people used to use the term Reen Beabry, or the King of the Pipers. Well, Seamus Ennis was the King of the Pipers to me. He was the only great piper I ever heard, and his music has stayed with me, imprinted in my spirit since he left us. He left an awful vacuum in our lives. We were consumed with admiration for him, and love for his music. And when I heard the tone of the pipes there, it reminds me of his playing of Philip Shave or Fag, which he got from Laura Scoil. And it's a beautiful slow air, which David Power plays so well to this day. I wish I could hear it again, Philip Shave or Fag, from Seamus Ennis.
Please welcome David Power as well. David's a great friend of Tony's, a great piper, and that's a photograph there of a party again in Tony McMahon's house was, and Des Garrity, who'll speak to us in a little while, who kindly drove Tony down, and Roisin down as well. So over to David.
Thanks, Ian. Like James, I don't trust the memory, so I'll go with the notes if you don't mind. I was too young to appreciate Tony in his most productive period as a television producer and radio producer, but I knew the influence he had on my father and other musicians of his generation in West Waterford as a performer, and for representing the stories of Seamus Ennis and Mrs. Galvin and Sonny Brogan and Michael Russell and the Dunn brothers and Joe Heaney and so many others with dignity and respect. And in turn given that respect and dignity to a whole nation of traditional Irish musicians and singers who had no or very little voice in official Ireland. I was introduced to him in the mid-90s by my Irish teacher and mutual friend of ours, Seamus McCrath, from Onrine, who was a sort of a co-conspirator of Tony's on song airs and the Irish language, and occasionally when Tony, whose spoken Irish is beautiful and free-flowing and lyrical, didn't trust himself with a phrase or a translation, he would always defer to the superior knowledge of Seamus, who comes from an old, proud Gaelic family and was educated at Mount Melleray Abbey with the Cistercian monks. I was in my early 20s at the time, and I didn't know that much musically, but I had spent time studying the old Irish airs from homemade reel-to-reel recordings of Laura Draper and Nicholas Tobin and Seamus Ennis and Laura Scoil and Joe Heaney under the guiding hand of our friend Seamus McCrath. And when I first met Tony in the RTE studios in Dublin, he was warm and he was supportive and charming in a way that I could never have imagined possible. I was treated with respect in the same way that he had treated the famous Irish musicians that I only knew by name, music and reputation. It was the start of a friendship with Tony, which continues to this day. And in 2003 I moved with my wife and 2 children to the United States, and to my surprise when I got there, the phone started ringing and doors opened, which confused me for a while until I realised that Tony's hand was in play. Having spoken to Martin Hayes and Earl Leonard and other musicians since then, I realised that Tony pulled strings in favour of many people. I had the honour to share the stage with him in a show called The Frost Is All Over, with specially commissioned poetry by Dermot Bulger, and it was produced by Tony's friend John Comiskey. We performed it with Eamon Hunt and Dermot in Ireland, in Glasgow, in Paris, in Louvain and in New York together, and we had a lot of fun. I also travelled around Brittany with Tony, visiting many of the old hunting grounds that himself and Barney had visited, and some of the stories from those trips were very enriching but maybe unprintable. In America, I was taking care of my toddler daughter, and my wife, Claire, worked for Waterford Crystal, and sometimes I'd be a bit bored, and I always looked forward with glee to the weekly phone chat that I'd have with Tony, which often lasted for hours and which often involved me having to scrub crayons and markers off the walls afterwards because I was taking care of the little one. And standard conversation was always high, funny, serious, always engaging and inspiring, and what developed in my mind was a picture of a man who made, for the sake of the music, sacrifices that I know I could never make. His authoritative voice added heft and value to our chosen religion, and when it was not valued, and he showed us how to have dignity for the music and for ourselves in turn. Tony, you are loved.
David. Sean Keane is the next person who sent in a tribute. Great fiddle player.
How are you, Tony? I remember the first time I ever heard you was on this stage in the old cinema in Ennis in 1956 at the Flackyall in Ennis. And can't remember what you played now, but you opened the ears of a new generation of not just accordionists but musicians like myself, and with your unique style of your interpretation of the Clare music that you inherited and made your own like no one else did. And you listened obviously to the traditional players, Clancy and Joe Cooley from up the road in Galway, and as I say, it was totally unique to yourself and your interpretation of this music. There was nobody quite like you, and you're as good as ever today, never mind anything else. And keep it going, Tony. I wish you all the best.
Looking at Tony McMahon's influence and his most important maybe contribution to Irish music from myself personally, I think it was the emphasis and the way that he highlighted the importance of a sort of a tacit knowledge that's an integral part of Irish music, and the knowledge that has obviously come down to us through the generations from our ancestors. And being tacit, it's obviously not something that we can describe academically or intellectually, and it's something that we feel or are aware of, or that we know intuitively, and that maybe comes to us from the enculturation process or whatever. And I think Tony McMahon's point, from the way I understood it, was in the march for progress in Irish music, that this fragile tacit knowledge could be lost or destroyed, and I think unfortunately a lot of people maybe didn't understand his message properly and labelled him as some sort of conservative purist, and I think that was a horrible mislabelling and a complete misunderstanding of the point, that that if this tacit knowledge is lost, that it's a kind of a tragedy for our culture.
I'm going to call on Des Geraghty, who drove Tony McMahon down this morning. He's a very loyal and supportive friend of Tony, so very positive guest.
I'd like to thank Liam for inviting me to say a few words, and among such a gathering of musicians and geniuses of the tradition, maybe my few words are not that important. However, I think everybody here probably has their own story, their own feelings about McMahon's music as a person. I just want to say a few words as a friend and as someone who loves his music and believes strongly in the spirit of McMahon that's going to go on marching on long after he stopped playing and will continue on now after today. For me, Tony's music was transformative. And there's some people here will remember, I was looking for a milestone in my mind. I remember the Pipers Club in Thomas Street in the early 60s, and the faculty there was Jem Nolan. A bird never flew on one wing, it was Jem Nolan. And sometimes there'd be a piper playing and someone playing a fiddle and some very subtle tune, and then Jem would intervene and say, I want an end to this, we're bringing on the heavy artillery. And of course the heavy artillery were the accordions. And everybody else, we didn't have sound equipment, everyone else was drowned out to be 4 or 5 accordions belting away, and that was the evening, Saturday evening. And you wanted to escape from that on a Wednesday, you went over to the Pipers Club, the Fiddlers Club used to call it, in Church Street, where John Egan insisted only fiddles and flutes could play, with the odd exception. Sonny Brogan was let in the odd time, or Bill Hart, but very rarely was an accordion player in there. Tommy pops off and played there on a Wednesday night. But for me, from the time I heard Tony McMahon playing in those early days, I always would describe it not as hearing his music, but you felt his music. And to this day I have that, it's you feel Tony McMahon's music. So whether it's an exuberant reel or a jig, and it raises your heart and your spirit and you saw it there, you want to dance. You're exuberant, you're lifted with the music, your whole heart and your spirit is right. Or you're brought down into the depths of passion, sorrow, heartbreak when you hear slow air from Tony McMahon. You know, when you think of the airs, you know, and all of those wonderful airs from Portnabuckie and the heart-rending notes that he got out of the accordion. And then when he played the triumphant marches of the Gael, had history. We've been playing so many of those wonderful marches, so that the whole mood could change, the whole feeling could change. And you were left with a feeling that there was someone here who was communicating hundreds of years of history and tradition into his music, and you were getting it in your heart and soul. Because I feel that the music doesn't come off the page of the written music, but it's in the sense, the feeling, your heart and your spirit is lifted by the music. McMahon captured it all. And he transformed the playing of the accordion, in my opinion, because you were hearing a piper when you heard him, or you're hearing a shannon singer, you heard a long note of the lady sing, you got that in the accordion playing. And when the bellows was operating, you were getting a sense of your heartbeat, you were getting all the sense, all of the kind of feelings that you could have as a human being, and the connectiveness that you have with the place you come from, which is Ireland, which we're so proud of. I don't want to say an awful lot, I'm going to say my heart was broken to see Tony gradually declining in his ability to play the music. But we're lucky, because so much of his music is recorded, so many looking at those that have recorded and not agree will never be repeated again. So many of his great recordings are there for us to hear, and people like Liam O'Connor are going to carry on that, ensuring that we hear that music in the future. Tony also didn't go to the school of diplomacy. And I was reminded listening to the English ambassador talking about Trump during the week that Tony is the kind of character that would say exactly the same thing about other people, and many people times they would be shocked. But as Peter Brown said to me, he's not always wrong, you know. So Tony had his effect on people. He was very honest, there was a lot of integrity in everything he said. He very often irritated people, but also we loved his music, we loved his presence, and I love the fact that he's still with us, and he was able to come here this morning. And thank you very much, Mahon. There's no saying from Raftery, isn't it, that also from Raftery is that the mensen hassen ik jouw clown marina, die mogen niet stemmen, it's very reached home. If I could be there standing among my people, my heart would rise and I would be young again. And looking at all my old friends here in Milton Malby, which we came to, by the way, Mick O'Connor and I came here, but it wasn't the Willie Clancy Fest. It's not like the Spanish Pride Festival, long before the Willie Clancy Fest, when Willie was alive and well. So I have great memories of this place. Go read them all, and I hope you enjoy it.
Des, very fitting words there, and Des correctly reminded us that we know that Tony's such a legacy of recordings, but his music also survives and is very notable in a lot of the younger generation as well. I'm delighted Conor Connolly here, who's a fantastic accordion player, and I'm sure I won't be alone in recognising some of Tony's influence within Conor's music, and a continuation there with Joe Cooley, of course, as well. And so, come on, let's Conor. Paul and say, this man here is unknown to me. Vic O'Connor, my father, I was going to say a few words about it.
Thank you. Well, that was great playing, and it's only fitting because Tony's been our hero and our idol for whole generations of musicians, and I personally witnessed the respect he had for the older generation of musicians, John Kelly and Joe Ryan and Sonny Brogan and Bill Hart. Tony singled them out and gave them great respect. And likewise with the younger musicians, he had these house parties which were great affairs, and you never knew exactly what was going to happen. Anything could happen, but a constant feature of his parties where he had young musicians, the young McKeowns, Mikey Smiths and Liam, and he particularly wanted to showcase them and give them an opportunity to meet the older generations. And some people have alluded to Tony's lack of diplomacy, but there's another side to Tony. He's entitled to all these opinions, and we want that. And people like Peter O'Loughlin, to another hero of ours, Peter said it as it was, and he was able to point a direction and keep us on the right track, much like John Kelly. And it's great to have that in our tradition, particularly things are going backwards and forwards. There's all sorts of things coming in, and apparently anything goes, but these people were our mentors. There was one personal thing I witnessed when Barney McKenna had a heart attack, and he was when he came out of the hospital. Tony took him into his house and convalesced him. And not many people know that. That's another side of Tony that people are not aware of. But when I met him first in Dublin, we were in Church Street Club, and the Keens, and probably Des Gate, you remember. He arrived up in this flashy car. It was a Renault, wasn't it? Bridie Lafferty, the great pianist, had his car with running boards and all. Really stylish. And Tony got out of the car, and Bridie was all dressed up. And Tony had a long leather coat, ankle tailored. And he had the rimless glasses, and jeez, he looked so figure. And strutted in and went up and played. And when himself and Bridie played, my God, we were stunned, because I remember specifically playing Kitty Come Down to Limerick. None of us had ever heard that, and none of us was able to play like that. So we salute you for all those things, Tony, and you've been an inspiration for all the young musicians and for us, and little kindnesses too. Remember Michael Tuberty, John Dwyer, Paddy Glacken. You organised for us to play with the Mullock set. We didn't know who was coming on, and they didn't know we were playing for them. But it was a wonderful piece of television and a great example of the dancing and the music going hand in hand. But I just want to finish on one particular memory I have, that when James came into the States, we used to compete at the Oireachtas, and when James went, we were lost. And then we came up with the idea, we'd ask Tony to play with us, and Tony agreed to play with us. So we had all the things worked out. The Oireachtas was a big thing. It was, all the mighty bands would come up for Kid Fonora and the Tulla and the Lochgown, all the premier bands and great musicians, but we had put a lot of work. But we never saw Tony at the rehearsals, and we sent him tapes and nothing came back. But we're going up the steps of the mansion house, and who was standing at the top with the accordion under his arm but the old Tony? I said, "What are you doing, Tony?" I'm going to play with you. And I said, "We didn't rehearse the tunes, you haven't been at the rehearsal." And he looked over my head and looked down at John Kelly, Michael Tuberty, the Keens, and Joe Ryan. He says, "We have it as a claim, or we'll slay them," he said. And we went over the tunes, I said sorry once or twice, and there was some reel of Michael's that we had to play three and a half times, something odd. But we went in, and because the Tony's recording was on E-flat, we had to have E-flat flutes, and very high, very sharp, it was great sound. And when we went, we played all these set dances and marches and jigs, and it was a phenomenon. It was electrifying. We never had anything like it. And when it came to the reels, were on the home patch, and we were lashing it with a cant of the change, and we just wobbled, nosedive, and we were in shock. We never really recovered. Tony once said he was thrown out of 4 KD bands. He had a record, but he played at the Castle, but we didn't throw him out, but we never asked it back because he wasn't a team member. So thank you for the memory, Tony.
I think my own music was directly connected with my love for the Irish language. And my advice to the wonderful young players who are up and coming today is to listen out for the love we all have in our arteries, in our belly for the Irish language, and to let that influence our music. And in relation to the Irish Traditional Music Archive, I've been thinking recently of the myriad of wonderful pieces of music which are lying hidden and unexplored in the archive. And when you consider so many young musicians making new CDs and not using the riches that we already have, I think a way could be got to alert our young players to the beauty of our archives, such as Canon Goodman's beautiful collections of music, and all the wonderful music you have in the archive.
Go mair, the Radams Tenora, Tony. As Fadan Lacher is Einert and Kiadur. I came to know you for the first time in Dublin in 1968 when my father brought the choir up to Rachtas na Gaeilge. You played great music that night with my father, much to the annoyance of the staff of the RDS. You became my hero. The small band of musicians that operated at that time were like a gang in a ghetto, more often disrespected than not. Even though they carried the torch for our culture and identity, it felt light at times, maybe because the comradeship was strong and we felt dear to each other. My father explained our native music to the nation in a radio series called Our Musical Heritage, ably assisted by John Kelly of Clare. He explained the importance and substance of this extraordinary culture that was still lingering on in all those mighty musicians along the western seaboard. The culture stood its ground against Western civilization. Then you came along 10 years later, and you made flesh of these ideas and notions and images and sounds. You paraded all the wonderful musicians on this island and further afield through the homes of Ireland via radio and television. You put these artists on a platform so that the people took notice and paused and listened, and a lot liked what they heard. The great revival took hold. In those early days you befriended me. You actually made me feel as if I could play a tune. You embarrassed me with so much unearned praise for my naive playing and ordinary tunes. But you gave me the courage I would never have had otherwise. I have never admitted before, but being my father's son did faze me at times. I never felt I was good enough a musician. You changed that. And I'm not the only one you have encouraged to strive for truth in music in their playing. I am no wordsmith, but I am sometimes lucky at making a tune. They bake and form out of emotion. And my respect and love for you made this tune. Maybe when we're both long dead and gone in 50 years' time, some old scadder pup around will play this march and think of you, Tony McMahon. It's tumulaich. So, warts and all for you, Tony, Shahut, Marshall McMahon.
to call on James Keane, another lifelong friend of Tony McMahon's. James Keane.
Well, I have many memories of Tony, especially. I don't know, Liam, are you going to show that other piece that I did send you?
I don't think that.
Right, that's fine. I didn't want to repeat the story. I have, as I say, no notes prepared, but I have. I'm lucky enough that even though as I grow older, I can hardly remember stuff that happened last night. I can remember what happened all throughout my life once it was connected to the music. And Tony, I adopted as an idol of mine back. Not that I play his style or anything, but his ability to play, the fire he included in his music, and I have very happy memories. I'm going to tell you, just describe a couple to you. My father used to bring us down to the Piper's Club early on a Saturday afternoon, and in case we might learn something and extra about the music. And this particular Saturday evening, I was sitting in the large room, and there wasn't much happening, and things were rather quiet. We didn't expect anything else to happen that great till the night session would start. And all of a sudden, this young man with at least a tube of Brylcreem in the red hair, combed back, and rambled into the room with his accordion. And Bridie Lafferty was close behind, and Tony went over to the other side of the room and dragged the chair back across the floor and sat down. Bridie was after securing a chair for herself at the piano, and he brought over his chair, put his foot up on the rung of her chair, and started to play. And he put on a concert. I swear to God, he was playing for an audience in the National Concert Hall, but it was only for 5 or 6 people in the Piper's Club, and he played for at least 3/4 of an hour. And I remember once again that one of the tunes he did play was besides all the reels and shakes, was Kitty Come Down from Limerick, and as I say, he revived that tune for our generation indeed. Another memory I have of going to Clare, many trips we made to Clare with the Castle Katy Band, and this particular time I was paired off with Bridie Lafferty for accommodations with Tony's mother down the turnpike where he lived, and I remember meeting his mother for the first time. And she was the epitome now of a postcard grandmother that you would imagine, with the decorative apron and everything else. And I used to wonder, where the hell did this lady ever find a fella like Tony McMahon? I couldn't understand the connection between this lovely, lovely woman and the wild young lad she had as a son, you know. And I'll finish off with this other little memory I have of being in Church Street one night, and luckily I had gotten to know Bill Hart and Sonny Brogan at the time, and they had just come in from Lavan's pub there on the corner, and the next man to land in the door shortly after them was Tony, without an accordion. Now, I understand that when Bill Hart and Sonny Brogan bought their accordions, they bought them on the same day, and they bought identical accordions. And Bill was a very careful man, a tidy man. He was an ex-Garda. And Bill opened his accordion case, and he still had the lovely silk curtain that used to be on, you'd get in those cases in those days. And when Sonny opened his accordion, you'd get the whiff of Guinness, of many pints after being spilt into the bellows over the years, and many packs of cigarette ash down into the bellows also. And Tony was asked to play, and he shouted for Bill's accordion, and Bill had the pipe in the mouth, and he says, "Under no circumstances are you getting my accordion." And he had to turn around and grab Sonny's box. But of course, even though it had mileage up in the Guinness department, he made it sing. And Tony had attended St. Patrick's Teachers College in Drumcondra, and he had the ability and the advantage of the education, and he could put a few words together, and it was no bother to him to explain what his inner thoughts were. And he was always a soldier in our minds, that he always stood for the music, and he always defended the music, and he always promoted the music, and he promoted the best type of the music, the stuff that came from the turf, from the soil, from the roots of County Clare, and likewise the rest of Ireland. I also admired, besides his accordion playing, I admired that point of view and his defence of our music. And I was lucky in that respect to learn that also from Tony, because I've been known throughout my life in the last 50 years in New York to come rather strongly and speak out and in defence of the music, thereby making a lot of people mad, and certain other people like Lazarus and people like that don't like that. And when you take over a musical organisation, and you have people, when they got the musicians' backs turned, they formed committees and ignored the musicians and kept set up book rules all over the place. So we have Tony to thank for that, and one of the few people that understands the tradition as much as he does. We were always lucky to have him in defence of our music. So, Tony, I'm forever grateful to you. Everyone else, I'm sure, is forever grateful to you too, because you saved a lot of what we love. We totally love it. And you helped out something that we all care so much about. And thank you so much.
Martin Hayes wished to send us his regards, Tony, and his best wishes. I asked him a couple of questions by way of email, and so I asked him what makes Tony's music so special. So Tony plays with an extraordinary level of feeling and passion. He only seeks to express soulfulness, exuberance and joy, puts those aspirations at the centre of his playing. For him, technique is the tool, not the goal. I asked Martin as well, what influence did Tony's music have on you? And his response was, Tony had enormous influence on me. I loved his music as a child, even before I could play. He was incredibly supportive to me in my early years, and his words of encouragement were real nourishment to me. I'm indebted to him for his belief in me when he was so regularly including me in his television programmes. To this day, I can find huge inspiration and strength in only just remembering and visualising his playing. I asked Martin for, if you were to describe Tony McMahon's music in one word, passion. What is Tony's musical legacy? for Martin. Many of our great innovators have shown us the potential in our music. O'Riordan's vision showed us our music in a new light that helped us as a nation to appreciate it more deeply. McMahon shows us a new level of soulfulness. He points to the deep potential of our melodic treasury. His playing shows us a musician accessing the deepest levels of passionate expression in a manner that will continue for years to come, to be an inspiration for anyone who wants to truly know this music.
My earliest memory of Tony McMahon was when he came here to Tulla to visit us here at this house. I think I was about 5 years of age, and Tony asked me to take out the fiddle and play a tune for him. I had just learned the Fair-Haired Boy, and I had just learned how to play triplets. So I played for him, and Tony, being as praising as ever, said, "God's earth, that was fantastic, and I love your little triplets." Then he took out the accordion and he played with me. So you can imagine as a 5-year-old how magical this was for me, and how influential it was. I think what makes Tony's music special is his rhythm, the passion and the soul that he puts into every single note that he plays. Whether it's a reel, a jig, a hornpipe or a slow air, he has this effect on everybody in the room. I think it's fair to say that Joe Cooley and Seamus Ennis would have been some of the main influences on Tony's music. However, it's also fair to say that Tony's love and understanding of the Irish language and also of the Shannon singing style would have been hugely influential on him as a slow air player. His admiration for the Shannon singer Joe Anu, I think, would have had a profound influence on Tony's slow air playing. I think the one word that I would use to describe Tony's music is passion, without a doubt. And I also think that Tony's musical legacy will be huge. The TV programmes that he has made, where he always brought the man at the back to the front, and he always wanted to hear the underdog. Even if they weren't the most fantastic musician, if they had something to offer, he wanted to hear it. And that's what made his programme so special. His influence on me and his influence on my generation as musicians has been extremely profound, and I think he'll always be remembered for that.
Thanks, so this course is relation to Tony's, a grandniece as well of Tony's, and her mother called Mary McNamara, great concertina, and very close to Tony as well. Paddy O'Brien, accordion player, sent his regards as well, and he wrote a very nice tribute that I'll read through here. So it's Slán to Tony McMahon from Paddy O'Brien. Some time ago, I was informed that a salute and celebration was scheduled in Milton Malbay for Tony McMahon in recognition of his long career as a musician and as a presenter of Irish traditional music. Therefore, I've written a few words that might pertain a little to a great musician, a man I first met in Dublin sometime in October 1968. These few introductory words that I've so far written say little about a man who has carried in his veins a long history, a proud history of an enduring legacy of music. This, I believe, is a historical connection, a condition that seeks the best and cannot tolerate the dispassionate. He has a bardic consciousness that is inspired by compassion and charity, while scornful of the smug nature of hypocrisy. As a musician, I've listened at length to his playing of the old airs and laments, and marvelled at his perceptive interpretations. The sensitive command of his instrument is evident when one listens to his lengthy lament for Owen Rua O'Neill. Playing this air, Tony finds a monumental mood of expression that manifests the grief of eternal loss after the death of the great Ulster chieftain. I've also been struck by the sound of his playing evokes within my mindful imagery. I hear the call of the tender emotional grief and the loneliness of loss throughout his rendition of Port Nabucco. Somehow, he replicates wind-driven ocean waves along with the stormy crash of tides on a desolate beach. These are the interpretive powers that are his. His playing of the jig and reel has often reminded me of a celebration of life, of a celebration of the joy of how good music can bring us all together. Such is the soul of the mighty man himself, Tony McMahon. Paddy O'Brien.
Two words, creative genius, I think, would be what I would sum Tony McMahon up. I don't think there are any other words for it other than that.
Complex man.
Well, I'm not able to play anymore now, as you know. But when the slow air went well for me, I was trying to immerse myself in it and to escape the slings and arrows of life by sinking into the loam of the slow air playing. And Potts was always in my mind as a memory, because only he could infuse a tune with the spirit of Ireland. And I'm not saying I would be able to do that as good as Tommy Potts did, but at least I tried.
Mesmerising renditions of the slow airs, almost, almost a trance-like, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Tony, he captivated, the beautiful Shannon singing style on the accordion, and that wasn't easy to do, So,
yeah.
Just an amazing musician. I don't know if there's anything more that I could say, but he's just the superiority and the command of the instruments,
Yeah.
And I think his legacy was he always believed. Tony always believed in what he taught us about the music, and he always believed in how it should be executed. He never, ever deviated, from what he himself learned. He had a love of the country, from Ireland, a love of the past, and that was so refreshing.
Hi, Steve Cooney here in Teelan in Donegal, adding my couple of focal to the proceedings. I hope you're all well down there. I played with Tony for a good few years, playing the guitar, accompanying him, and it really was an education. I learnt a lot about traditional Irish music through sitting at Tony's side and hearing his stories. He would talk about the likes of Willie Clancy or Sonny Brogan, Cooley, and he would just cite some intimate personal details, the way, the angle of their cap, the address where they lived, their style of playing, and many little anecdotes, their attitudes to life. And I felt through Tony I was getting to know these people, because I had only come to Ireland in 1980 from Australia, and I missed that generation altogether. So playing with Tony was an education like that. It was also an exercise in courage, because we would go on stage only knowing or having agreed what the first tune of the set was going to be, and that was usually the Rolling Wave. So, but apart from that, it was all for grabs. It would be thrown open to the floor, and Tony would play any request that came up to the stage. People would shout tunes, and Tony would play them. And I would have to kind of face into it too. But that takes a lot of courage. Most of us, if we're playing on stage, like to know what we're going to do and have practiced our parts so that at least we can escape with some dignity afterwards. But Tony would just hurl himself into the fray very courageously, I thought. He's full of courage, and his energy on stage was remarkable. Also, there was one night we played in Newry in the town hall, and somebody called out a request, and Tony said, "I hate that tune, but since you've requested it, I'll play it anyway." So he played the tune, and at the end, well, actually it's not such a bad tune after all, I'll play it again without prejudice. And wow, wow, wakata. So I admired that, because we often form opinions, and the opinions we form we tend to keep. But Tony's well able to change his opinions. He has strongly held views, but if he feels that they need revising or changing, he'll change them. So I admire that about him too. And I admire the way he talks about spirit. To him, it's all about the spirit of the music. And I love that, because I find Irish musicians generally are uncomfortable talking about matters of the spirit when it comes to Irish music. So I do like that with Tony, and he's just tremendous energy altogether. So I learned an awful lot playing with the man, and I hope you have a great day, and best of luck, Tony.
You've a way with yourself with words, Tony. Do you? I know you were writing as well, and you published some of your memoirs. Do you ever, if you had you not played music, do you think you'd be involved in another art form, and if so, what art form?
I would have liked to be a writer, but the talent came too late, the interest came too late, mainly because I was a lazy person. But I would have liked to write. I'd like to finish my memoir too, but I can't use my hands now. Like my voice. Age, infirmity, and Mr. Parkinson have conspired against me. They have twisted my voice and my hands and deprived me of my ability to play. They haven't yet taken my love of the music. But traditional Irish music has been my main love and my main motivating factor in my life. And I thank all the great musicians who crossed my path. Seamus Ellis, Sean O'Connor, Tommy Potts, Joe Cooley, Willie Clancy, Paddy Eichfeg, many more. And I grieve for all those who have passed, even though they're still fully alive in my mind, what's left of it.
We're getting very close to the end here. An awful lot of people contributed to this presentation today. I've listed them there. I'm conscious of time, and the heat building in the hall too. But I'd like to thank, in particular, Tony for giving so generously of his time and an interview, and especially acknowledge to Dermot Mahon and Matthew Costa, who came in last minute to conduct those interviews, which I really appreciate. Des Garrity for driving down. All the musicians who spoke. Like the colleagues in the ITMA as well, who helped with some of the interviews as well. Niamh McNeil, my wife here, who helped a lot behind the scenes here. So many photographs as well that were contributed as well. I've listed many of you up there, and greatly appreciate it. But everyone I wrote to responded, and it shows that without any fuss, and it shows that the respect people have for Tony. I know Scoil Samhraidh Willie Clancy wished to make a presentation as well, and to Gaiman and Harry would like to make a presentation on behalf of Scoil Samhraidh. So they're welcome to come up now, Eamon.
James Keane was here last. So. Thanks very much, Dave. On behalf of Scoil Samhraidh Willie Clancy, I would love to take the opportunity to thank Tony for his long-time friendship and his many contributions to the school down through the years. He has featured many times giving lectures and working on documentaries of different musicians during the school. And I'd also like to thank Liam and all the people who took part, and for Des for bringing Tony down. We're so delighted to have him here today. And on behalf of the school, we'd like to make a small presentation to Tony out of gratitude for all his friendship and generosity. I think it's time to bring down the lamp again. So.